experience that they've had, and then how we can all better address this to ensure a better, more equal and welcoming world. So that's the idea behind this event, and I'm gonna hand it over back to Geneva. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Naz. So my name is Geneva. I'm the program director for the Interfaith Center, but I am acting as moderator tonight and in more of a support role. So I'm going to be, Nav is actually also one of our panelists. I'm going to be directing the questions. We have a series of 3 prompts, and then we'll open it for question and answer with the audience. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with the Interfaith Center, we are located at Miami University campus in Oxford, Ohio, and our mission is to invite people of diverse religious, spiritual, and secular worldviews to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and build relationships, as well as unify people of diverse faith traditions around common moral, social, and ethical concerns. So we're very happy to have you all here tonight, and grateful to Nav for organizing this. So our first panelist is going to be from the pagan tradition, and her name is Kathleen Caffrey. She's the media pillar of the Ohio Pagan Alliance, a follower of the Reconstruction Modernizing Hellenic tradition, and she focuses her efforts on increasing knowledge, dialogue, and shared action in celebration of the diverse religious fabric of the world. And the first question that our panelists are going to be addressing tonight is, what are the biggest misconceptions of your faith? So I am going to turn over to Kathleen to address that first question.
I'd have to say Hollywood either loves us or hates us. I'm not really sure which it is. If you look at any thriller movie, a lot of TV shows, we are either these saintly reincarnated or we're these devil summoning something else's. I'd hate to say, but we really are neither of those things. We are people, and we do try to follow ancient traditions. We try to follow ancient wisdom, and we're very diverse. I think that's another thing people don't understand. There is not one paganism. There's many, 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 many. So we're trying to keep this short, so I'll keep it short. But yeah, we don't summon demons, and there is no one paganism. No, it's not out ever. It just doesn't happen. So just keeping it simple and short, I would say that's pretty much the biggest misconception.
Thank you, Kathleen. So our second panelist is Alan Edelman. And Alan has attended the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, where he received his master's degree in Jewish education. He holds a master's in education policy and leadership from the University of Kansas, and he's the Jewish director and newly elected vice chair of the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council. So I'm going to turn over to Alan and to answer the same prompt. What are the biggest misconceptions of your faith?
Well, I would say the biggest misconception is, thank goodness, by and large, been eradicated by Vatican II, because the biggest misconception of Jews was that we killed Jesus. And that did not put us in good stead for many, many centuries. Fortunately, as I said, in 1965, I believe, Vatican II, the Catholic Church officially said that that was not correct and is not doctrine to be teaching in the Catholic faith, and most other Christians had stopped saying that. And that, of course, led to centuries of persecution, particularly through the Middle Ages. But as I said, that's a misconception that, although it still exists, and among some anti-Semites, neo-Nazis, and other other white supremacists who want to perpetuate hate against Jews, they still use that periodically. But I think today one of the biggest misconceptions that I find as I visit communities, churches, where they haven't had an opportunity to meet a Jewish person, is that all Jewish people are rich, and all Jewish people are really smart, and all Jewish people are doctors and lawyers and successful business people. And whenever I get that, whenever I get that question, especially in a church or in a religious setting where they're familiar with the Bible, I like to point out that in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses, one of his teachings said, you should teach your children. So education has always been a very important part of Jewish tradition. In fact, systematic education was started in the 2nd century by the rabbis living in Palestine and throughout the Roman Empire. So education has always been important. And another thing that's been important is a concept called tikkun olam, repairing the world, making the world a better place. So the purpose of our education is to make ourselves achieve success where we can make a difference in the world. And one of the results of that, of course, is that some of us are successful, and there are a lot of Jewish philanthropists and a lot of Jewish, and the negative stereotype comes out, of course, when you have a Jewish person who owns a business that has been less than honest or less than promoting an ideal that is very near and dear to the Jewish faith, that is repairing the world. A recent example is the Sackler family, who promoted drugs that people became addicted to. And that's a very sad thing, and it's an embarrassment to the Jewish community. So I would say that's probably the biggest misconception.
Thank you so much, Alan. Our third panelist is going to be Faith Hadley. Faith is a sophomore from Los Angeles, California. She is a chemistry and nutrition double major, I guess I should say, at Miami University. She was raised in a Christian household, and then her faith really grew to become her own in high school. She hopes to work in the food science industry, but her real passion is helping other women and men fall in love with Jesus. So Faith, I'm going to turn that question over to you. What are the biggest misconceptions about your faith?
Hi, good to be here. I think one of the largest misconceptions about Christianity is that it's all just a bunch of rules, that it's a list of ways that you can't have fun. It's a bunch of moral check boxes in order to get the status of a good person. But the reality is that it's not about rules. It's about a relationship. Rather than looking at a person in terms of either good or bad, it's about whether they're spiritually alive or still spiritually dead. And that's because we believe that God is an intimate and personal God who created us to be in a perfect relationship with him. And because he's perfect in all ways, including in love and holiness, justice and truth, a relationship with him means that we have so many things, including abundant life and joy and peace, and that he loves us, has a wonderful plan for our lives. However, because of our own stubborn will, we choose to go our own way, and we live life according to how I want to live it instead of how God has asked me to. And this breaks our fellowship with him. And the consequence of this self-will, which is what sin, if you've heard that before, the consequence of that is separation from God. And that's because God is morally and spiritually perfect. And so he can't be around our sin. But the beautiful thing of Christianity is that we think that God bridged this gap by sending us his son, Jesus, as a provision for our sin, where because Jesus lived a perfect life on earth and didn't sin, his death on the cross took our place and paid the penalty for our sins. And then he conquered death by raising from the dead. So through individually believing in him and what he's done for us, our sins are forgiven and our relationship is restored. And that is what brings us from spiritual death into spiritual life. And that restored relationship means we're no longer separated, and that's how we get to spend eternal life with him. So because this is a free gift of grace that is offered to anyone, it's not about us climbing our way to God. It's not about us being good enough and doing enough things. Because the beauty is that I couldn't save myself, and instead Jesus came in order and died for me. What I couldn't do, he did, so that our relationship could be restored. So obviously this is going to change your life, because when someone you love and trust asks you to do things, you're going to follow what they ask you to do. So it does change how I live my life, but I'm not living my life that way because I just don't want to have fun, or it's because I have entered this beautiful relationship with a God that loves me. So it's not about rules, it's about a relationship.
Thank you so much, Faith. So our fourth panelist will actually be Navkiran Chima. So she is a second-year undergraduate student at Miami University and is double majoring in political science and international studies, with a minor in social justice studies and Arabic. As a Sikh American, Navkiran hopes to promote the values of Sikhi and ensure understanding to create a better community, nation, and world. On campus, she has actually founded Miami University's first Sikh student organization. And as she previously mentioned, she is also the intern at the Interfaith Center for the semester. So I am going to turn it over to Nav to answer the first question. What are the biggest misconceptions about your faith?
So the biggest misconception about Sikhi doesn't really have to do with the practices of Sikhi, just because I don't believe there's enough information out there that's readily available for people to even understand what Sikhi is. So that's where the misconception lies. A lot of people tend to think that Sikhi is a branch of Hinduism or Islam, but it's actually its own religion, and it was founded fairly recently in the 1400s. And so the biggest misconception is that it is its own religion instead of a branch of either Hinduism or Islam. And this has translated to a lot of problems for the Sikhs. I'll get more into that later, but especially dealing with autonomy and sovereignty and just being recognized. So I'm also going to keep this fairly short. The biggest misconception would be how it is viewed and how it is categorized as its own faith instead of under or a branch of a different faith.
Thank you. So our final panelist will be Dr. Deborah Clark-Vance. She holds a PhD from Howard University in the Department of Communication and Culture. She participates on the Cincinnati Festival of Faith Steering Committee and has been a member of the Baha'i Faith for many years. She is on the local spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of Cincinnati. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Vance to present the Baha'i position to the question: what are the biggest misconceptions of your faith?
Thank you, Geneva. Thank you for inviting me onto this panel. Nav, also, both of you. So I've got a list of misconceptions, so that it's probably my longest section of this conversation. The first and the biggest one is that the belief that the Baha'i faith is syncretic. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's a hodgepodge of all the other religions. The Baha'i faith began in the 19th century, so it's not as well known because it hasn't been around as long, even though it's in practically every country in the world and has been for more than a century. So even the Dalai Lama thinks that. I read a recent book of his, and he talks about that ways. But instead, and it's interesting because this isn't said about Christianity that incorporates Old Testament into Christian doctrine, and it's not said about Muhammad, who mentions Old Testament prophets, and even in the Quran includes stories of Christianity. Instead, what the principle in the Baha'i faith is the idea of progressive revelation, that because God transcends creation, God must speak to humanity through humans who are, we call, I think in the Quran, they're called messengers. The Baha'i term is manifestation, who manifest God's words and teachings. And the manifestations of God all share the same fundamental spiritual teachings, but each brings a different or a new perspective on the life of the spirit, and each renews the social laws that are appropriate to the time and place where they appear. Another misconception is that the Baha'i faith is an Islamic cult, and this is because it was born in the Persian Empire and of primarily Muslims. It's a complicated history. I don't want to get too detailed about it, but however, it has been recognized officially in Islamic countries as a distinct religion from Islam since early in the 20th century. So it officially is not a cult. Another interesting one is that Baha'i is confused with B'nai B'rith. And the implication is that the Baha'i faith is that we're Jewish, which explains to people or helps explain to them why our headquarters are in Israel, in Haifa, Israel. The world headquarters of the Baha'i faith are in Israel because the founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God in Arabic, had been exiled throughout the Ottoman Empire and ended up in Akka, in Palestine, in the prison city of Akka, which at that time was where you sent people to die. And of course, he didn't. He lived out his days there for the next 30 some years. And another is that, and maybe this is my last one on my list, is that the Baha'i faith is a cult. And my only response to that is that people fear and denigrate what they don't understand.
Thank you so much, Deb. So now we are going to address the second question for the panelists.
Oh, Geneva, I'm sorry, I had one more on my list. Is that okay?
Oh,
one more.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, sorry. I didn't notice it because it was formatted wrong. The other one, the final one is that it's just spiritual and not practical. Instead, so many of the Baha'i writings are mystical and reveal spiritual teachings, but the faith also has an administrative order that was designed by the founder Baha'u'llah. So rather than clergy, we have assemblies that the Baha'is live according to this order. So we have a different calendar. Our calendar is 19 days. We meet once every 19 days. We elect local, national, and world administrative bodies. So sorry for messing up, but I wanted to add that. That's important.
No, you're totally fine. Okay, so the second question we have for the panelists is, how does this misconception translate to xenophobia and stereotyping? And have you ever faced discrimination or felt unsafe because of your perceived or actual beliefs? How have people outside of your faith perceived you? And so we will go back to Kathleen to start us off.
I remembered to unmute this time. I'm a positive person, but this is actually really bad. Paganism is used as a reason to deny custody in courts when it comes to children. There's multiple instances of grandparents, predominantly Christian or Catholic grandparents, kidnapping grandchildren so that they cannot be raised with demons or something like that. I myself have been fired from a job when the owner found out that I was not part of his faith tradition. There's housing discrimination, there's hate crimes. It's fairly common in the pagan community that you keep your animals inside the house. It's good practice, don't get me wrong, but it's something we do because people take their attitudes out on our animals. So that's a safety issue for them as well. Again, I try to be positive. this is a really wonderful faith, but unfortunately, because of the media, because of centuries of demonization in largely European culture, because of a lot of things, there's a lot of beliefs that we eat babies or worship the devil or, you know, things like this. And that unfortunately does translate to unfortunate modern day circumstances. So again, I'm a positive person, but, you know, putting cards on the table, people who are usually very open-minded about a lot of faiths, when it comes to paganism, suddenly it's different and it's frustrating. But part of the reason I do what I do is hopefully to change that. So let's get that done.
Amen to that. So this misconception of Jews being wealthy has led to, you all recall Charlottesville a number of years ago when white supremacists marched through the streets and Klans people, and they marched in front of a synagogue on Friday night while Sabbath services were going on with tiki lights, very similar to what the Nazis did, what the Nazi party did in their demonstrations. And they chanted, "Jews will not replace us." And what they meant by that was that not that Jewish people wanted their jobs, but that Jewish people control the economy, people control the world. And in 1903 in Russia, a document called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was written by a group of anti-Semites who wanted to discourage Jewish involvement in what was quickly becoming the Russian Revolution against the monarchy there. And Jews were involved in that because Jews were always suppressed by the monarchy throughout the Middle Ages, etc. But there were a group of Russians who were anti-Semitic and didn't like Jews. And so they wrote up this document. And it basically says that Jews are a cabal that are planning global domination and will control the world through the media, through banks, et cetera, et cetera. And Henry Ford, who was an anti-Semite, the founder of the Ford Motor Company, he had 500,000 copies of this printed up. And the Detroit paper was very anti-Semitic around the same time, and any time that there's depression and that people, the farm crisis, we saw a similar thing. White supremacists and anti-Semites played on the farmers who were losing their farms. 40 years ago, we had it right here in the Midwest, and they were demonstrating in front of synagogues and threatening Jews and calling in bomb threats to Jewish synagogues, etc. And we've seen that happen again in Pittsburgh. A synagogue was attacked on the Sabbath morning, and a number of worshipers were murdered in other places as well. So this stereotype of the fact that Jews are wealthy and Jews want to control, and we are in the media and we're in the banks, et cetera, has manifested itself in this classic anti-Semitism. It does have implications beyond just anti-Semitism, threats to Jews. It has also been responsible for Jews being murdered as well.
In terms of Christianity, I want to start by saying that in America, I'm so lucky to be a Christian in America compared to other countries where I may face disownment from my family and imprisonment and physical harm. So anything I'm about to say after this is recognizing that my life is so easy and so blessed and privileged here. But in terms of life in America, for me, I think a defining word a lot of people may use to describe Christianity from an outside perspective would be judgmental. A bunch of people telling you what to do and then not doing it themselves. But for starters, I apologize to you if you have had encounters with the church in that way, because that is not biblical. That is wrong and not at all what Christ wants us to be doing. Like I said earlier, the entire point about Christianity is that we're all equally broken and equally spiritually dead and in need of a savior, and that we were not saved through our own efforts, but by Christ coming down and him being the one who repaired our relationship and restored us to spiritual life. But because there has become a tone of judginess around Christianity, I have found people very unwilling to give me the chance to prove their assumptions wrong. But the fact is that almost like 85% of Americans claim to be Christians, but that's just not true in terms of like 85% of the country does not live a biblical life, like committed to following Jesus wholeheartedly and giving him their entire lives. And so when someone does actually do that, they're working against all these people who've had all these wrong encounters that create misconceptions about Christianity. But my goal is not to cast shame on people or to cast guilt on people, but people assume that that's what I want to do. And so I lose friendships and I lose respective professors. And I experience people who know nothing about my views, and they assume that I'm a bigot and a hypocrite and a judgmental person even before they know me. But I don't want to go through the laundry list of someone's sins with them. All I want to do is tell them how much that Jesus loves them and how much he wants a relationship with them. And so but I'm sometimes placed in a position where I can't do that because people assume that all I want to do is just blame them and cast guilt. So that is really unfortunate because I don't want those relationships cut off for that reason.
So sorry, Faith, were you finished?
Yes, I'm all done.
Okay. So in Sikhi, I forgot to mention this during the first question, but another misconception is the militancy of the followers of Sikhi. As a common belief that we hold is the idea of miri piri, which is spiritual power as well as physical power and the right to defend oneself and stand up for social justice and make sure that if you see something that isn't socially just, you are standing up for equality and justice. So with that idea comes the misconception that a lot of Sikhs are militant. And so talking about how this translates to xenophobia and stereotyping, along with the thing I mentioned before, is that a lot of times people, especially after 9/11, carried out hate crimes against Sikhs because they thought we were Muslim. And I'm not saying that, oh, don't come for us, we're Muslim. I'm trying to say that both religions do hold a lot of right and talk about equality and truth. So how that translates to xenophobia for Sikhs is through different hate crimes on the basis that people believe we are militant. There was a flight in Canada, I believe in the 1990s, and it was struck down and Sikhs were blamed for this attack, but it wasn't the general body of Sikhs. It was very specific, and also the stereotype that we are Muslim, so then a lot of hate crimes have been targeted towards us. And this has led to a lot of instances. My dad actually, you can physically tell that he is a Sikh. He wears a turban, and a lot of times when I'm going places with him, we face a lot of backlash or comments that kind of that are very hurtful and again categorize us as Muslims. And also in terms of Sikhs in India, that Sikhs in India have faced a lot of hate as well due to not due to not giving them the proper autonomy for their religion, and also recognizing them as a true religion, which has actually led to genocide against the Sikhs because of this idea that they're militant, as well as that they aren't a proper recognized group. So that's how people outside of our faith perceive us, and that's some of the ways in which we face a lot of xenophobia and stereotyping.
So Geneva, you had several prompts besides the main question. Do you want us to respond to all? Because I have only one little thing for if it's just xenophobia stereotyping, but there are a couple of other sub-questions, the exclusion and perception. Is that included?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome to respond to any part of the prompt.
Right, thanks. So so in terms of being stereotyped, well, Baha'is are teetotalers, so we're often excluded from social gatherings. I guess that might be a stereotype, or I'm not sure. But the idea that if you don't drink, you're not fun, so we're not going to invite you. I can deal with that. Middle Eastern friends experience a great deal of xenophobia and stereotyping in their native countries. Probably not as much in the United States, but as much as anybody from the Middle East would experience in the United States. There were a couple of other sub-questions that we were asked to consider. One was about being excluded because of our perceived or actual beliefs. I do get from Christians that I'm going to hell, and I also hear from Muslims that I belong to a cult. Those aren't real frequent, but those exist. And until recently, we've been excluded from interfaith groups, and possibly it's because we don't have a clergy, and there's no, it's difficult to identify a person who might be able to represent the community. So I'm on an assembly, but I don't speak for all Baha'is. I speak from my understanding of the Baha'i faith, and that's true of any Baha'i. I'm not giving you official. There's nothing official about what I'm saying, and maybe that's true of everybody else on the panel. And then how do people outside of my faith perceive me? I think it just depends on which people, because I have many friends outside of my faith, and most of my relatives are not Baha'is. I come from a Christian background. Came to the Baha'i faith in my teens. So. But I think we're probably not well enough known. I know that in the Middle East, Baha'is have a lot more trouble, and in fact, in Iran, they have no legal rights. They have no legal right to be married because because Baha'i marriage isn't recognized. They can't get passports legally. Maybe now they can, but for years and years they couldn't get jobs, and kids aren't able to attend school. College, get jobs, etc. So in some countries, there's a great deal of stereotyping and exclusion. That's it.
Thank you, Deb. So we have one more round of questions for the panelists, and then we will open for Q&A. So this question is, what is the truth, if any, that is masked by these stereotypes, and how can we all work towards resolving them? So Kathleen, I will hand it over to you.
Wow. Okay, so I've been see if I can keep that going. It's a very old saying, but there's a saying that says there are many paths up the mountain. And in paganism, what we really hold is that your path is not someone else's path. We are our own people. We have our own futures, our own destinies, our own characters. We are meant towards different endings. I myself am Hellenic. I'm very close, Athena, Hecate, that sort of thing. But in my community, we have Nords, we have Chemetics, that's Egyptian, if you don't know it. And there's really no issue. I am on my path, but I will never know, and I will never understand, and I don't need to. It's not required. They have truth. They have their own sacred journey that they are going to go on with whatever deity or energy or whatever they want to work with, they find themselves called to. So paganism is very much finding the path that is sacred to you, with the meant to learn from, and then being supported by the community to follow that path to where it goes. Hollywood really, I don't know. I mean, maybe it helps us get better known, but the demons, these are Christian ideas, and yet somehow we get tied up into that. It's not what we do. We follow wisdom, essentially, but the form of that wisdom varies from person to person. And it's all incredibly personal and incredibly powerful. And that's why we're so diverse. That's why there's so many different paths. That's kind of the essence of who we are. So I don't know, maybe it's not as clean cut as some people prefer, but there's a lot of personal study. There's a lot of personal introspection. There's a lot of contemplation your relationship with the people, the energies, the deities that you so find. And I'm sure that's clear at all, but that's generally the experience of it. And in life, you find much the same, that we are all on our own path. And that gets masked is probably this beautiful diversity of all these traditions working.
So I think this is a really, really important question, because all stereotypes come from some event in the past or some document in the past that people buy into. So how did it come to be that Jews were associated with money in a negative way? I take you back to your studies of the period of the Middle Ages and the caste system which existed in society. You had the church, the Catholic Church, of course, at the top. Then you had the nobility and the monarchy, which was, of course, very much connected with the church. Then you had the tradesmen and the craftsmen. And then you had the serfs, the poor people who lived on the land and pretty much worked for the rest of the system, if you will. In the midst of all this, you have the Jew. And the Jew is not quite a serf, because he and she are very, very educated. And because they are discriminated against, because the church is perpetuating this idea that the Jews killed Jesus and they need to be punished. And I referenced the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition. Life for the Jew was very, very difficult and secluded. We were ghettoized or forced to live in villages, whatnot. And we couldn't be craftsmen or tradesmen, because you had to be a member of the church to be a craftsman or a tradesman. Certainly we weren't going to be in the church. We weren't going to be monarchs, for sure. And so we were kind of stuck in the middle as this educated group that traded with each other, because nobody else would trade with us. So the Jewish communities would sort of have connections with one another. And a very unpleasant task that the system had to deal with is collecting taxes from the serfs. And so because the church and the monarchy perpetuated the idea that you couldn't charge interest to one another. Christians couldn't charge interest to one another. They used the Jew to collect the taxes. And then once they collected the money, because they had this connection with other communities, they could make their money grow. They could invest their money and they could deal with usury because they weren't Catholics. They were Jews. They were others. So you had this negative feeling on the part of the serf, who every year the Jew comes knocking at the door. Oh, here's that Jew for my money again. Well, the Jew wasn't keeping the money. The Jew was taking it to, but it was such an unpleasant activity. So let's have the Jew do it so the people will hate the Jews. And then, of course, when you come, you go to the nobility and you give the money, and then there's this negativity that they're charging interest and making your money grow. But so there's negativity on both sides. So this is kind of the origin of how the Jews became associated with money. And now that we understand how that, if we go back and understand how that system came to be, that it's easy. And in Vatican II, they talk a lot about that history of anti-Semitism, culminating with the Holocaust, of course, which is what prompted the Catholic Church to begin thinking about that. And to Faith's point, the other thing that the Catholic Church said was that we're not the only way to God, that Islam, Judaism, and the other faiths are as legitimate, whereas for many centuries, the Catholic Church taught the only way to God is through Jesus. And the church changed. And of course, most Christians don't believe that. Personally, it's for them, it's the way, and that's wonderful. But forced conversion or discrimination against those who are not Jewish, not Christian, obviously was unpleasant. So it's important that we understand where these, whatever it is, the biblical injunction against homosexuality, for instance, is another example of if you understood ancient Near Eastern law and the idea of why that was an abomination, because those were practices of people who were not in the spirit of monotheism, if you will, and therefore it was an abomination. Well, today you have LGBTQ people who believe in God. Well, that's no longer an abomination. They didn't believe in God back then, which is why there's the abomination, et cetera, et cetera. So the more we know the roots of these stereotypes, the better we can understand them and therefore stop perpetuating them.
In terms of how I think our culture can help with some of the issues in terms of thinking about judgmentalism and everything that I spoke on earlier, is that our culture doesn't know how to disagree with someone, but not also make a value judgment about the other person, where our generation thinks we have the right to cancel someone just because we don't think the same way. But there needs to be a difference between not condoning someone's behaviors or beliefs versus defining who they are by it. For example, when people hear that I think it's wrong to drink underage, or when they hear that I'm waiting to have sex until after marriage, they automatically assume that I'm judging them when I hear that they went to a party uptown, and they assume that I must be on some moral high horse. But I'm not. Biblically, I realized that before I put my faith in Jesus, I was just as spiritually dead as someone who doesn't know Jesus yet. And I'm called to love my neighbor above all else, and to want what's best for them. And so then there's a couple points of logic of this in saying, I think, so part one is that I think the best thing that someone could have is a relationship with the God of the universe. And then because I know that, I know, well, part two is that I know that there are some things that he asks us not to do, and that when we break his guidelines, it hinders that relationship. So the logic follows that if I love my neighbor and wants what's best for them, then it wouldn't be loving of me to condone or encourage the beliefs or actions that God asks us to restrain from. So while I can't agree or encourage what I don't think is godly, I am not judging you. I love you, and I want you to experience the goodness of God. And so disagreeing with you doesn't make me a bigot. It's, I love you, and I know that Christ loves you even more. And so our generation needs to learn that disagreement doesn't mean I want to go like punch you in the face, or that I want to go yell at you, or that I hate you and all the generations of your family. It's just that I'm approaching the world with a totally different mindset. And in my mind, in order for me to love you, I can encourage some things and can't encourage other things. But yes, that's all I have.
So for Sikhi, a lot of these misconceptions come from blatant ignorance or in just lack of knowledge around what Sikhi is. And also the idea that Sikhi is a branch of Hinduism, I believe, and I'm not talking for all other Sikhs out there, but I believe is a consequence of Hindu nationalism and trying to be a unified India and make sure everybody is homogenous in that sense. And so a lot of these misconceptions come from lack of ignorance and also this idea of homogeneity in being a state. And then the truth that's masked by these stereotypes is that Sikhi is its own religion. It came about trying to promote equality, selfless service, charity, and just love for all humanity. And it was born from these inequalities and injustices that were happening in India, well, it wasn't India at the time, but South Asia during the 1400s under the Mughal Empire and other smaller empires at the time. And so in redefining and getting rid of these stereotypes, I think we should all just try to be more open and more welcoming, and having this conversation is a step in that direction, learning more about others, understanding and appreciating each other's diversities, and trying to get more information so then we don't make a misjudgment on or about somebody else. And so that is how I believe we can all work towards resolving them. And also just if you hear something that is negative or unjust or somebody talking from a place of ignorance, please try to just correct them and let them know that, you know, maybe you should do more research on this before talking about it. And also more specifically for about Sikhi, that Sikhi's basic pillars are equality and universal love of humanity and all beings. So that's all I have to say.
So there's so many great comments already. I think mine touch on all of them and maybe pull threads from all of them. But I think what we're really talking about is human consciousness, the ideas, the constructs, and the concepts that we share. When they're shared, they seem like they're actual, they're real and solid. And we have to question that. Are these concepts real? So that would make us then a seeker, I suppose. And so the idea of the insider, if there's a tribe, if there's a group that sees itself as the most important one, it will decide who's inside and who's outside. And that's been true throughout history in many cultures, including present day. And at the root there is competition. People on the who feel inside, they feel like they're being attacked. They're, maybe their boundaries don't want to spread, but again, that's all in your head. That's not real. So we need to everybody needs to examine our thinking. What are the sources of our prejudices? What are the sources of our preconceptions and our desires? Is it because we want to be the boss? And then go and embark on our seeking the truth. I think anybody of any faith is still seeking the truth. I mean, I don't think we ever know everything about our own faith. Seeing with our own eyes, hearing with our own ears. it's one of the, I suppose, the benefits of not having a clergy in the Baha'i faith. We are enjoined to read all the 100 volumes that Baha'u'llah revealed, and there's I don't know, 1 million words. Not all of them have been translated yet into English, so it's not possible to read them all. So there's a basic idea, I think, that, and everybody's touched on this too, there's an idea that Baha'u'llah may have been probably the first to mention, the idea of unity and diversity, that we can all be different, but also be united. And people have talked about that in various ways. We're talking about a spiritual unity. In the Baha'i faith, everybody, most Baha'is come from different backgrounds and have family of different faiths or no faith. And finally, I think by having these sorts of conversations, by associating with people of other beliefs, is how do we work towards resolving stereotypes.
Great, thank you so much. So now we're going to open for the audience Q&A. We've actually received a couple questions in the chat that were sent to me privately. So the first question is for all of the panelists. How has your experience in interfaith communication affected your overall view of your faith? So I will just kind of open the floor to whoever wants to take the lead in answering that.
I'm going to jump out just because I'm going to have to leave around 6 o'clock for another program.
No problem.
Tonight is Kristallnacht, actually the anniversary of when the Nazis began their campaign against the Jews. So it's a very important night, and there's a number of programs on. I've been involved in interfaith work ever since I was in college, and coming on the Interfaith Council has just been an amazing experience. And Kathleen, I didn't know anything about paganism, and actually, as a Jewish person, I grew up learning that Judaism was the antithesis of paganism, that we didn't do what the pagans did in ancient times. So I grew up with a negative attitude toward paganism, not directly, because I didn't really know any pagans. And being part of the Interfaith Council totally re-educated and redirected my understanding of paganism, that it's very different today than it was in ancient times. And so I think interfaith organizations are really the best way for us to, when we see face to face, when we eat together and talk together, there's nothing better than that. And then we see each other as human beings. And when we stereotype, we don't want to see the other person, because we might find out that, guess what? As Deborah said, we have more in common than we are different.
Ellen, if you have to drop off, there's actually a question directly for you. Would you suspect that the sincere effort of interfaith believers can help bring about peace in the Middle East and the world?
Absolutely. And similarly, in 1972, when I studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, I had the opportunity to wander into the Arab market in the old city of Jerusalem. And I went to do some shopping in the shuk, in the market. And these wonderful Palestinians invited me into their shop. And for the first time just like I grew up thinking that pagans were bad, I thought that every Arab wanted to kill every Jew, because I had only learned about all the wars against the modern state of Israel. And all of a sudden I met these wonderful Palestinians who said, we're a little better off under Israel than when it was under Jordan. But the bottom line is we want a homeland of our own. And since then, because of all the social justice I had done growing up, there was no reason why this social justice needed to be so. In the same way, and I'm very hopeful for peace. Last February, before all this craziness started, I took my dream came true when I took a group of Christians, Muslims, and Jews to Israel and Palestine. And we traveled with an Israeli guide and a Palestinian guide. And during the day, we visited the sites holy to the three traditions, including the Baha'i Temple in Haifa. And in the evening, we met with groups of individuals who are working toward peace. The leaders, unfortunately, haven't gotten their act together, but the grassroots, we are so optimistic, including an Israeli woman whose son was killed by a Palestinian sniper in the Gaza Strip, and a Palestinian woman whose child died. Her 5-year-old inhaled gas during a demonstration and didn't make it to the hospital in time and died. And these two women, these two mothers of these two children who were killed in the conflict, come together and they talk about how the conflict must end. So I am very hopeful that religion will, in fact, bring an end to the Middle East peace, the conflict.
Thank you so much, Alan, and so lovely to see you and grateful to have you with us tonight. Do any of the other panelists want to address the previous question of how your experience in interfaith communication has affected your overall view of faith? Kathleen?
Yeah, I would. It's kind of counterintuitive what I'm about to say, but when I'm in interfaith gatherings with sincere believers in their faith, I think we are all experiencing the same Holy Spirit. And that reaffirms my own belief. Baha'u'llah said that this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. All of the manifestations have brought the same spirit in different places, different times, with different complexity. And I feel that when I'm with people, sincere believers of other faiths. And I know that sounds kind of funny, but it reaffirms my own faith, that what we all feel is real if we're sincere believers and we're adhering to or paying attention to the revealed word.
I'm going to have to echo off Deborah here. When I was younger, it was less the case, but now that I'm a little older, a lot more people that I meet and talk to of different faiths just meet you where you are for who you are. And a part of it is I was raised in the Deep South, which is a thing, but it's been a great experience, whereas in my earlier days, when people found out I was pagan, it was, currently it's, with a handful of exceptions, it's got a lot better. So definitely steps in the right direction. And I really like what that says about our society going forward.
For me, I definitely want to echo what everyone else said. And then in addition to that, I don't want to have blind faith. I want to have a reason for everything I believe in, or else what's the point? I want to believe in truth. And so that's why conversations with people of other faith are so good, because they challenge my own thoughts and make me be direct with myself and be like, Faith, okay, like, why do you believe this? And like, what are the reasons? And do you think there's evidence for it? And is this good? For instance, like I have a friend who's Hindu. And so we were talking about our different beliefs just a couple of days ago. And she said a couple of things that I didn't agree with at all. And I was like, okay, Faith, like, let's take a step back. And like, why do you not believe in those things? And so those friendships with people of a different faith are so good for both people, because it makes us like think about what we believe and like take stock of like the inventory of the thoughts in our heads.
I think everybody pretty much covered exactly what I was thinking. All I have to do is echo what they said, as well as by talking to people of different faiths, it really has solidified this idea that humanity and this energy that connects us all is really the same energy. Like there's so much commonality between every faith, and they really are based in this idea of equality and love. And that's really what I get by having these conversations with people of different faiths.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. So let's open up if there are other questions from the audience. You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to ask the panelists something directly, or you can type it in the chat, and I can moderate it. Anyone have any questions? Becky, you have a question? Kathleen says she thinks people are tired. It is getting pretty late. We are on the hour now. So if we don't have any more questions, I guess we can start wrapping up. Maybe if all of the panelists would like to just give a final thought, something that they would like to leave all of our participants with today, one thing they'd like the audience to take away from this conversation. Whoever wants to jump in, more than welcome.
So
we can go in order, just for all time's sake.
Sure. Kathleen, do you want to go first?
I was okay, sure. If there's one piece of wisdom that I've learned more than anything else, is to be open. Wisdom takes every form you can possibly imagine, and several that you haven't yet. That there's a million paths forward, and none of us actually knows when we start out what our adventure is going to be in life. So just keep an open mind and an open heart, and enjoy the ride. It's a great adventure.
Thank you so much for letting me talk tonight. That was a huge blessing. And my big takeaway to those of you who may have been hurt by the Christian church in the past and have had bad experiences, I want you to know that is not biblical. And the Bible calls us to love God above all else. And when we love him, we will love our neighbors, and our neighbors are everyone. And so please, please forgive us, and please give us grace, because we are all broken and fallible people. And then there's also people who are proclaiming to be Christians who actually don't care what Jesus said, and actually don't care about what he has asked, how he has asked us to live. So if you remember nothing else, please just know that Jesus loves you, and that he wants a relationship with you, and that no guilt or shame or fears or insecurities is enough to keep him from you, because he loves you and he wants a relationship with you. So thanks so much for tonight.
My little takeaway for everybody would just be, if this was your first time hearing about Sikhi, please feel free to reach out to me or continue to learn more about not just Sikhi, but all other faiths and all other people who are different from you, and have these conversations in your everyday life with people who you are close with, and continue to raise these questions and ask and fight for equality and justice and understanding of all diversity. So
I guess also thank you, Geneva and Nav, for putting this together. I think we all need to help each other develop the divine attributes that we all can reflect, all the godly attributes: generosity, compassion, love, truthfulness, to practice those and to help support each other to reflect those, and also to sincerely pray to God to illumine our hearts, to be able to know what's true. I think those two things.
Thank you all so much. So Nav, I think you said you wanted to do the closing remarks, so I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you all for joining us.
So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for coming out tonight and sharing a little bit about your experiences. This was a lot of fun to put on and participate in. And thank you to everybody in the audience who came to listen to what we had to say, and who by showing up, genuinely show that you care about making this world a better place and a more understanding place. So thank you so much. And that's all I have to say. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you. And it looks like there was a request to maybe contact the panelists further to explore the conversation about their faiths further. If the panelists are open to doing that, I will collect their email addresses and send that out as an afterthought, so to everyone who registered. So we can discuss that at a later time. But so thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.